Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, Sammy, let's get into the female hockey evolution.
Okay. Women, and remember, it's women's and girls.
Yes, women's and girls.
Yes. As we change our vernacular. Not always easy, but don't worry, I'll be there to correct you along the way.
Okay. Go ahead. You start it because you're in the middle of the transition to professional female sports, hockey, and the growth of female sports generally. And Caitlin Clark in basketball has finally been able to garner some financial reward, but more importantly, publicity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you broadcast, most important thing is your ratings.
Yes.
How many listeners are you getting?
So, Wally, I don't know if you know, Wally and Tom, that I'm not involved in the PWHL at all. So there is still the hurt and sadness, I think, that goes along with that, with never, it's not necessarily that you want the job. I think, as coaches, we all recognize this scenario where it's not necessarily you want the job, but you want to be asked to decline the job or to want the job. So to never be asked is hard. To see a lot of my colleagues that have put so much time and effort into women's hockey, to never be asked is hard. So it's a very inclusive, exclusive, group. And I recognize that, lots of people have incredible wealth of information and knowledge within this game, and that others can certainly take it to a different level than we ever could. So super exciting what's happening in the game, but it doesn't include us, and that can be hard at times. I told myself I wasn't going to watch any games this year, and then of course I watched every single game. So but it's a different setup than I think some of the other times. I mean, it's our leagues in the past with 10x the amount of money into marketing. So less salaries than maybe we had before. So the salaries for the players is less, but the amount of money in marketing is huge. So every single game this year was fully produced by the PWHL. So at about a $50,000 to $75,000 hit for every game. We never had that kind of money. So TSN and Sportsnet are not paying for it currently. Of course, they want to get a deal, but that means 60 games times that amount of money that the PWHL was able to fully produce, protect, produce in their own way, So I feel like what's exciting is so many people now know about women's professional hockey. I have people asking me about it all the time. People don't know the history and all of that, which I don't expect them to. Most people are new to the game. But I think what's hard for me and a lot of my peers is that history gets rewritten in a certain way by those in power. And I think this extends beyond sport for sure. This is can go with race relations, gender relations. But whoever is the one currently in power gets to have the narrative. And, the narrative right now is that it's the first, that it's different, that it's all of these things. And for those of us, including you two, that have been in the game for so long, have seen so many iterations come through and so many people put so much time and effort into it. For all of that to be erased is hard to see. But it's opened up a whole new set of eyeballs. Following along with the WNBA, the same thing is kind of felt that this is what we've always wanted, and that's what a lot of women in the WNBA that comment on it, that play in it, this is what we've always wanted. But the narrative now is all around Caitlin Clark, who is not the best player in the WNBA. Now, that's not to say she's not good, but her being left off the Olympic team was a big deal. But she's young. She's, this is 144 of the best women in the entire world in basketball. And she will be there eventually. But the narrative is forgotten that for 23 years the WNBA has existed prior to Caitlin Clark, and that people are coming in making comments on the game that perhaps are lacking historical context. So, I think I struggle with both sides. It's exactly where women's hockey is exactly where we always wanted it to be. I think we just always thought it would include us, and that's hard.
That's kind of strange that you did so well and all that, and then you're not part of this.
Right. Yeah.
Is Cassie's a consultant or something, or tried to get advertising for them or something?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm happened to get to Ottawa and spend a week with Carla and her team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really exciting out there in Ottawa, what she was creating.
And the atmosphere in the stands, it was just incredible. The manager, and this is what I'm sort of learned, is everybody seems to have hired managers with NHL experience. And the model of the NHL and the funding and the spectrum of things that go on behind the scenes in the entertainment business, regardless of sports or what it is. I believe that managerial group, or whoever's put the money aside, I understand the owner of the baseball.
The Dodgers, yeah, LA Dodgers. Mm-hmm.
They're just following a business model, not regarding what your conversation and your concerns is, the culture and the history.
For sure, it's business now. It is a real business, and so there's going to be people left over. What's really interesting is, so this year I've been out of hockey altogether, except for broadcasting. So I still get to work for TSN for the World Championships. So that's a separate entity altogether. So I get to do the U18s in the Worlds. But I've gone back into being a full-time professional speaker and management consultant, and so working with businesses. And I am now getting hired in the space of mergers and acquisitions and takeovers, which is really interesting because having gone through it with the CWHL and now with the PHF and the PWHL, this is a space I never thought that I would be in, but managing teams' expectations when they go through mergers, they go through acquisitions in the corporate world. I mean, these feelings are all the same. They're not any different. So all of this learning, and that's what I try to take away from it, is that despite some of the difficulties, I think the hardest thing is you like the people you worked with, you like those people and you want them to succeed, but it's business now. And so I think I have all these new appreciations and understandings for a different segment, I think, that has been great for me. So, you still get to talk hockey, you still get to talk about your teams and the different characters within the team, but in a very different space.
Sammy, one of the things that back in my era, in your era of playing female hockey, I called the female national team pure hockey. And Matt Hoven,
women
at the University of
women's hockey, Wally, women's hockey.
He's written a book on Father David Bauer, and I mentioned that Father Bauer would have loved the female model because it was pure sport. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about winning at all costs, although that was the expectation of the governing body. I always took a Father Bauer approach as be the best you can be and enjoy the experience. So that's why I actually appreciated the female game. It's not the sport. It's the sport of hockey, not the business of hockey. So I'm concerned and generally about sport becoming just a business, and what sports supposedly can teach and accomplish in terms of societal impact is going to be lost, and maybe more harm be done than good if we're not cognizant of it, particularly with young people growing up.
I'm really curious about Carla's experience because, I think everybody loved playing for her. What a great experience it was in Ottawa. Tons of people in the stands, tons of following behind the Ottawa team, but then they didn't make the playoffs. So, does that change? I think in Carla's mind it doesn't, but now somebody else is hiring her, So if you're a coach hired to win, which this is professional hockey, she didn't succeed. But for all those players that said, they loved playing for her, that was, is that more important but maybe not at the professional level. So I don't know. I'm curious from her perspective if that was a disappointing or yeah.
Well, I'm going to try to get her to come on, Sammy, but have you moderate the session.
That'd be fun.
That would be really good. I'll see if I can arrange it, and because in my visit there, I got to witness the pressure of winning and losing.
Mm-hmm.
Her wondering whether she would get her job next year and stay at the U of C and have a guaranteed comfortable.
Right. Yeah, and most of those coaches just took a 1-year leave of absence, right? Like who's the U of A coach?
Howie Draper.
Howie, yeah. So who was on here?
Went back.
Yeah, so he'll be back, I guess, at U of A, and Haley Irwin, who was at Ryerson, is Carla's assistant, right?
Yeah,
I think. So she only took a 1-year leave of absence as well. So a lot of them that were U Sports, the U Sports granted them a lot of leniency, but they won't continue to do that. So.
And they just announced Josh is now the permanent coach at U of C.
Oh, so that means Carla's probably back again.
Yeah, she's committed.
Yeah, okay.
So meeting the manager and him at her at the same time and judging the pressure of not winning, I felt it was a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
There's, when you look at the NHL and you're hired to be fired if you don't win, well, it's a process.
Yeah, well, the winning general manager in the PWHL got fired for Minnesota. Yeah. So that's interesting too. Like what went on there that you did exactly what was asked of you, which is to win.
Yeah.
And then you're fired. So.
Well, that's the business of sports. You don't know who pushes what buttons where in terms of decision making. And that's what always has bothered me about NHL hockey is I think the organizations with sort of a synergistic leadership and a sound philosophy of operation agreed upon by the leaders of the organization at every level guarantee success. And I'm really happy for Jim Nill, Tom. He's been selected the general manager of the year a second time. And knowing Jim, having worked with him when he was a young junior player growing up, and just knowing the way he approached things, he admitted to Tom and I years ago that any of 20 teams in the NHL could win the Stanley Cup.
So I think it was the same in the PWHL this year. It looked like any team could win any game. And what's really surprising, I really like Howie Draper, and every player that's ever played for him really enjoys playing for him. But then he didn't see that success at the professional level. So I would be curious to a debrief with him. I don't know if either one of you guys chat with him, but what his experience was like. He seems super eager and excited about the opportunity. So, and as both of you know, I feel like he goes in with the right mentality of, the person first. And at least when he has been on the Sharks calls, that's what he seems like. So I'd be curious.
Well, it's all When it's that close, it comes down to players.
Yeah.
But if you all did exactly the same thing, you know,
Hmm.
and I remember taking the hockey class at Bemidji from the coach, and most of the time he just BS'd about things. And then the last class, he talked about, building a team and the key to success. He wrote on the board in huge letters, TALENT. And he said, that's the most important thing.
Talent wins. Yeah.
Well, if you do a good job and they're just not good enough, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, it was noticeable in the playoffs that you have a top team in Toronto that looks like they're going to win the whole thing, and then they meet a really hot goalie in Maddie Rooney in Minnesota, and she shuts them out, and then they move on. And
that's the thing too,
yeah.
Right? I know my last year at Mount Royal, we came in first, and my goalie, both of them got so cold. We were out shooting the other teams like 35 to
Right.
20, but
So it all comes down to goaltending, is what we're saying.
Oh, it does. Like, look at Bobrovsky.
Yeah.
I mean, he's on no way Edmonton shouldn't have won that first game, but
Yeah, he's been unreal. And Skinner's not been bad. I mean, it's, he's letting in what I would assume you would probably let in, the amount of goals, but Bobrovsky has just been lights out.
Yeah. Well, my philosophy has always been, you ask your defense and goalies 2 or less goals, and your offense 3 or more.
Yeah.
So he hasn't let in more than 2. So I think he's doing his job.
He's given his team a chance to win, which is all you can ask, right?
I sent an email with my Prague pictures.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Sammy, I got a question about Toronto. Tom talked about talent. And how much of a factor was Spooner's injury?
Yeah, that was huge. They after she went down with the knee injury, they only scored one more goal in the series. So they just couldn't put the puck in the net without her. And that could have just simply been, lines couldn't connect, couldn't create chemistry. But that was a huge hit. But what a year Natalie Spooner had. I mean, I feel like with the national team, she's had so many ups and downs and been put into so many different roles. And, these last 3 years have been really hard on the national team players because they haven't been able to play. So you can never prove yourself. You never have somewhere where you can showcase your talents, where you can just simply toil away in obscurity. And so the fact that she got to do that this year, finally again, I mean, any team I've ever been a part of with Natalie Spooner, she's a gamer. Like, she's the one that shows up. And the last 3 years of no games, I'm sure, hasn't been easy. So then with the national team, she gets demoted, and then not really being utilized in any way that is important. But what I loved about this season was she just kind of really came into her own and just started to play her game again and used her talents and shot the puck, which her shooting percentage was unreal. Like, I think it was like 40% higher than the next person in the league or something. So.
Well, I'm impressed. All of the national players that are playing in the league are getting better.
Oh, yeah. And so is everybody else. Yeah.
That's the first thing I noticed. But just focusing on somebody like Natalie, she went from being a middle of the road player to being a top player.
Yeah.
In the league and impacting the national team now. Her role is elevated. Her confidence is elevated. Her image is elevated.
It'll be curious to see, because at the World Championships, their play in the league did not affect their status or whether they made the team or not. So it did seem like Tom Ryan. No, yeah, that's his coach. What's the coach's name?
I forget. He was coach of the year in the PW.
Coach Ryan didn't seem to select his team based on performance in the league. So, for instance, his goalie Kristen Campbell had come into the World Championships having leading the league in shutouts and save percentage, and still saw no games, just as we sort of expected in prior years. He still went with the goalies in the order that they had been. Same with the players, seemed to be in the order they had been prior to the league. And no one was invited that had been doing well. So a Daryl Watts or players like that they hadn't sort of got themselves back into a situation, or Katie Tabin, a defenseman, players that really excelled in the league. So I'm curious for the September camp, if any of those players get invited to an actual camp. It'll be interesting to see if it changes the dynamics of who they are selecting and where they're utilizing those players. Like, does Spooner now make your top line? She should, because she's proven herself, but who knows?
That would be frustrating to be playing against the same players, doing better than them, and then, you're back to
they're your teammates too, right? And they're on the third line and you're on the top line. There's a great exit interview with Daryl Watts after Ottawa lost out and missed the playoffs, which is like a 10-minute interview. And, she's on a 1-year contract, probably making $35,000. And just talking about how, she's kind of got to shop around now. Like, she has no guarantees in Ottawa. There's no more money to go around. So 8 players on every team got guaranteed 3-year contracts, which is basically the Olympians. And so all of these other players are kind of left in limbo. There's maybe an additional $10,000 per team that can be spread out amongst your other players to increase their salaries. But then you also drafted the draft class was huge. So those players should garner big salaries as well, but they can't. There's just no more money to go around. So yeah, that would be frustrating when you know that you outplayed that person, but they're on a 3-year contract valued at, near $100,000. That could be tough.
Well, I look at it like a historian. It's an evolution.
For sure.
You've got a pro league, and pretty soon you're going to have the Olympic team be a pro model where you're going to be picking players from the league.
Yeah, and I think, Wally, I don't know for sure, but I would assume they're done with centralization. I don't know how you centralize and have this league continue at this level.
Yeah, they probably have to do what the NHL does and just,
do camps. Yeah.
And have something in the summer or something.
At least they have more international breaks built into every women's pro hockey schedule. So in Sweden, in Russia, and in the PWHL, they had breaks built in. So there's more time to be able to play in like a Four Nations Cup or the rivalry series, those kind of things. So I think you can still fit those in. You just can't fit in a whole centralization.
Yeah, I remember when I was in Salzburg, there was times that they went to the national teams and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Around for a little while.
Yeah.
Well, Sammy, the thing that impressed me watching the Pro League is the number of female players that I hadn't heard of that I began to appreciate. So the talent pool is much bigger. And
I think that was the frustration in our league, right? Because all these players played in our league in the PHF, and there was always the thought that the players that held out, that boycotted, were so much better than these players that were actually playing on a daily basis. And so I think the PHF players had an advantage to start the season because they were used to the grind. They were used to being on the road and being full-time hockey players, because ours were all full-time hockey players. So, I think you're right. Eventually, the national team players caught up. And I think, by the end of the season, I think the cream kind of rise to the top. But even, on the Minnesota team, Michaela Cava, who was our MVP last year, was drafted pretty low. And yet she was nearly the MVP next to Taylor Heisey. She had the most points in the playoffs for Minnesota and really was dominant. So there wasn't the appreciation, I think, by the management or the coaches that had just been in that national team silo of who was going to emerge as the top players. Hannah Miller on Toronto was another top player that had been playing over in the Russian league and had played for China at the Olympic Games and had just this whole storied hockey history before she even got to the Toronto team, and then ended up on a line with Natalie Spooner, and the chemistry was just unsurpassed. So it was really nice to see these players getting the accolades they deserved, when for so long they've been told they played in a beer league, or they're not really professional, or they aren't good hockey players, or whatever.
Well, what opened my eye the most was watching the dryland training of both teams when they were there in 2 days early, and you get to see them work out, and the size, the fitness, they were cut, they were athletes. That was the bottom line.
Right.
The era of just being a hockey player has gone full circle, and every one of the girls has to be fit.
Yeah, that's been long gone for the last decade, I would say. When really NCAA prominence came into, there's no choice but to be fit. You're never going to make it if you're not the ultimate athlete.
Well, I've been out of it for 10 years. And so walking into it for the first
it was
time,
different.
that was my immediate reaction. My God, athletes. And then the post game, the autographs, it was just authentic appreciation.
Yeah, and connection.
Yeah, it was really quite amazing. And, I left there really being optimistic about it. I worry a little bit about, the bottom line is going to be attendance and dollars and cents.
For sure.
A lot of what we talked about. So, what is the attendance in terms of sustenance in the East American coast teams? Are they going to?
So, for instance, in Boston and Minnesota and
like
New York
is talking about expansion, realistic even, because the hockey may be good enough, but if you don't have a fan support or a base, to what degree will it be financed externally or supported externally?
Well, I think the model for professional sport in general, Wally, has changed, let alone women's sport. And I saw that firsthand working the PHF, that it wasn't, yes, you want it to be sustainable and that you want your profits to match your losses in a year. But when you have an ownership group, that is not the primary concern. The primary concern is increasing the valuation of the franchise to be resold. So that's where the money really is made, when you resell the franchise. And so, in my opinion, that's what they're doing in the PWHL, is they have an 8-year bargaining agreement with the players. The owner, who owns all the teams, has an 8-year commitment for financial commitment to this. And then at the end, that's, I think, when he makes his money, is when he sells those franchises. So, yeah, I mean, when you expand, then that also increases the valuation, right? Because you have more money coming in at the end. So as long as you're willing to put the money in, it's like buying a house, you're willing to put the money in, you work really hard, and then at the end, it's the sale that is so it's a different process. But, I think that they certainly did great numbers in attendance this year. And it was noticeable when it was marketed that rinks were filled very, very fast. Scotiabank Place here, and in Montreal, the Bell Center, and even in Minnesota during the playoffs, and Boston during the playoffs, crowds came when they knew about it, and it's always been the hard thing in women's sport, is getting the word out there. And that's what the PWHL is doing a really great job of, is getting the word out.
I think in all the sports, like in Calgary, without newspapers being, hard copies, it's really hard to know about anything.
Anything.
Like
any local
sports. You just, unless you go to their website, and they hardly talk about it on the sports radio. And even Saskatchewan last year wasn't sold out for a Western Conference playoff game, which is
Mhm.
unbelievable. You know, and so the marketing, it's pretty tricky right now.
And there's so much noise, right? When you're marketing, there's just so much you're competing against. So yeah, it's not easy. But I thought that the PWHL did a good job of breaking through that this year. But that takes a lot of money. You know, it isn't just one person sitting there and emailing people, which we've seen in the past in women's hockey. It's a whole team of people that are working in all different aspects of marketing and communications. And yeah.
Yeah, it's a different world as far as that kind of stuff goes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't know in Calgary where that Mount Royal University is playing. You know, there's one game a year they really push, and at the Saddle Dome. But
Yeah.
other than that, you know, and same the junior A team, like all the teams, there's nothing.
Right.
You know, without a newspaper there, you really don't see it. You have to go to someone's website.
Yeah.
So,
Or go to an actual game and get a schedule. But if you don't want to know when that first one is, it's hard to follow.
yeah, I'll tell you, Wally told me that the team from Beijing, the girls' team, was playing a team from Calgary.
U13. Yeah.
U13. I think it was U14 because there's some of my ex-players there.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was scary to watch. The Calgary girls' skills were so much below theirs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like they handled the puck like, I think it's kind of like the club system in Europe where you really get fundamental skills early. Everybody can make a pass, take a pass.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing is they recognized pressure and spun away and made the play, where the Calgary girls just skate right into it and lose the puck. And the
Yeah.
score, it was a runtime game. It was 7-1 for the Chinese.
Interesting.
If it was stop time, it would have been a 12.
Yeah.
That was pretty scary to watch about what we're doing in our development.
Well, I mean, you take those are the top players in China coming, right?
No, it's just Beijing.
I know it's just Beijing, but there's Beijing, there's Harbin, and there's Shenzhen. So there's like 3 centers of players. So you have, there's maybe another 3 or 4 teams like that in China, whereas in Canada, there's another 100 teams at that level. So the one thing I like about the small system like China or like hockey in Texas or things like that is you have access to really great coaching all the time and you get to be on every team. So there's no, it's like what Wally has always talked about. Like there's no tiering of the kids. Every kid is playing and every kid is being coached to the maximum because that you need everybody on the team to be able to succeed. So
It's the same in Europe with the clubs.
yeah, with the club system, and I love that. So, and they all have access to great coaching, and there isn't that pressure to create teams, to pick teams, to leave kids off teams. So, it definitely, obviously, it showed that they all have the skill.
Yeah, and the way they played the game, they played the game well. You know, they were moving the puck, and
Mm-hmm. Oh, good for them.
For girls that age, they played the game.
When we played in Shenzhen with the Canadian Women's Hockey League and would go there, there would be busloads of kids that would come from the Beijing Hockey Association to come and watch too. And like, this was a really big deal and their aspiration to play in that league. And yeah, it was fun to see them. And same with Hong Kong would come over. I mean, that was the thing to see. Everybody knew to come and watch the CWHL play. So.
Yeah, when I was coaching Mount Royal, Steve Carlisle was coaching the Chinese team. I think they were hosting the championship that year. And they practiced with us and we scrimmaged with them a few times.
Mm.
The big thing that they loved was my girls made up a dance warm-up.
Okay.
And they had them do it with them. And, it's about a 10-minute warm-up. And they danced with them and they really got a kick out of that.
Well, that's awesome. That's what sport's all about. Bridging the cultures,
Sammi, I got a question about, we're talking about female professional hockey.
Women's professional hockey.
Pardon me. Thank you. And the WNBA as a model being ahead of the game, is there anything to be learned or garnered from that experience?
Yeah, there's been some great white papers, Wally, written about it. I think there's sort of two schools of thought. One is you have the NBA backing, and so you instantly have access to the marketing machine that is the NBA. And so I think that was the PWHPA's intent, was to partner with the NHL, realizing that they could instantly get a ton of marketing and expertise from the NHL. But I'm almost glad for them that it didn't work out, because it allows them to have autonomy over their own league, which I think is something the WNBA has struggled with at times. That WNBA has been sort of a second-class citizen to the NBA within their marketing profiles and everything, and don't always get treated in the best aspect. Although certain things have certainly augmented in the last couple of years, but in the WNBA, there are independently owned teams and there are some league-owned teams. So there's kind of a mixed model. Whereas in the PWHL, they have like one central ownership, which allows them to have full autonomy over all of the decisions. So on-ice rules, how teams are set up, where they play, all of those comes down to, it's easier to make one decision. But I think eventually they'll have to be sold off and then have independent owners. And I think that will change the landscape for sure, because then you'll have, maybe it's the NHL model of having governors and one commissioner. But that will certainly change. So the WNBA is about 26 years old, I think, 32 years old, something like that. So they certainly are further ahead than hockey is, simply because they've had years under their belt. However, what hockey has has generations of players that have played at this top level and have attempted to create this professional league that they've desired. But more than that, they have all the learnings from the WNBA, from the National Women's Soccer League, and from other leagues that have gone. There's I think it's AUA. It's a women's league in the US, which is a really interesting model that they have 4 or 5 different sports under their umbrella. And then, so for instance, if it's the volleyball season, all the pro volleyball players come in and they play matches and they play kind of a season, but every game is, players get points in that game, and then it gets restructured the next game. So you play with different players all the time. And you as a person are getting points in order to have score in the top 10 for the end of the season. So it's less about a team winning and more about individuals getting a big purse at the end. But you need your teammates to be able to do the things that you do well. So like a back catcher might get points in a different way than a baseball pitcher would get points. So anyways, interesting model. They've been running now for about 5 seasons to much success. There's volleyball, lacrosse, softball under their umbrella for sure. But yeah, so it's not as if the PWHL has to start from scratch. And I think that that's what makes them ahead of the game, is they get to share these best practices with all these other leagues, and take from men's hockey what has worked and try to avoid what has not worked as well. So, this year, I think things were put together very quickly. Maybe not everything went as they intended it to go, but they have a long off season here. I think they start back up in November. So long off season to figure out best practices for next year and try to just constantly improve. I think, I say during my speeches, if today you can just be a little bit better than you were yesterday, if next season they can just be better than they were the season before, then all of women's hockey is a little bit further ahead because of that. So, I don't think they intend to follow the WNBA model, but I certainly think there's a lot to be gleaned from it and to learn from mistakes and successes.
One of the things I want to ask you, Sammi, watching the PWHL games, physicality seems to be an entertaining part of what they do. They haven't crossed the line. when you look at the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, the physicality, the size of the player, the size of the surface, they're less physical in terms of, I think they're playing a better game ethically. They're not trying to hurt each other. I'm concerned about finding that line where it's entertainment on the female side, and yet it's safe.
Well, Tom, what was your thoughts on watching it? What did you like it? Did you not like it?
I thought that I thought the last game I saw, the playoffs there, was the best I'd seen the women's hockey play. Nobody missed passes, and I'm really kind of watching. I see what I sit way up at the NHL games, and you can always see what the play is.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty easy sitting there watching, and 90% of the time the NHL players make the right play. They find someone, they just move the puck, and I've always thought other levels don't even compare, to them. But that last game I saw was the closest I've seen. They were making the right play at the right time. Nobody was missing passes, like hitting their stick and bobbling it and stuff like this. And I thought the level was way higher even than at the start. And they were allowing them to ride players off.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, someone just takes the body and not the puck, which isn't what they're supposed to be doing. But that wasn't even always called sometime. But I think allowing a little more contact, but then you're not playing at the end of your stick. You're not half checking someone with your stick there, like you're really playing it properly. So I was really impressed at the end with the level of the play.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. I think the last couple game or probably the playoffs were much better. So Wally, I think a couple things. One is, I think it surprised the players. So they were told at game one, there's going to be contact. So that's hard because some have grown up playing boys hockey where they would have learned how to hit and take a hit, and the majority wouldn't have. So, you're throwing your body, but are you doing it in the right way? How are you taking a hit? All of these things. So I think each team hired some development coaches to work on hitting and taking hits. And you could see that as the season progressed. It wasn't just I'm throwing my body just to throw my body. While you say it wasn't over the line, Wally, there was, I would say, triple the amount of man hours, woman hours lost to injury than there ever has been at this highest level. So they're going to have to take a look at the reserve player roster because right now it's very small. And so I think they were allowed to take 25 players max for practices. And I think that will have to rise because they lost a lot of players to whether short-term or long-term injury. And when somebody like Natalie Spooner goes down on a hit where, in my opinion, she's too far away from the boards, the player is too far behind the play to create contact. It just is kind of set for being able to make these kind of mistakes that lead to injuries. So there was a lot of, ankles and knees that we just have never seen in the game before. I thought there'd be way more concussions, but there wasn't that. There was sort of the awkwardness, I think, of the hit versus you're hitting your head on, or it's a huge hit and you're hitting your head on the glass or the ice. So it's not necessarily what I expected, but there was a lot of injuries, and I think if they continue to do it in this way, it just will cut seasons players short from that would have maybe had a long time in professional hockey prior. But I mean, I guess that's men's hockey too. So But is that what we want in the game? I don't know, for to sacrifice in terms of entertainment, because fans certainly liked it. I mean, all the new fans loved it. And so it seems to be what what I hear in social media, what the players want. But now if I'm a coach or a GM, I'm certainly choosing a different kind of player. They didn't choose their players based on knowing there was going to be contact. But now I may be picking the more feisty player or the bigger player. And so what will that mean long-term for maybe the more finesse player or the shorter player? I don't know. So be interesting to see what kind of comes out of this. This was a trial year as players picked it up. I would say the end of the season had a ton of contact, just bodies flying everywhere. And penalties, the players were getting frustrated. Some were penalties, some were not playing, knowing where that line was. The refs didn't really know where the line was. And so I thought in the playoffs, it went back more to what I would say would be more of a basketball play, where you're rubbing somebody out or you're picking a player or things like that. And I liked the playoff style of hockey versus the end of the season personally. But we'll see what happens at the start of this next season.
I think that the determining factor always should be, if you have your stick on the puck, then you're actually making a play. So if you have your stick on the puck, people aren't going to get hurt. But if your stick is up and the only thing you're doing is you're knocking someone off the puck and then getting the puck, that's a totally different,
right?
Because that's proper technique, is to have your stick on the puck. You shouldn't be, because I watch boys hockey all the time, and these are skating around, the sticks up in the air and they're hitting people, and and then the puck is there and they don't even pay attention to it.
Right.
So if you have your stick on the puck, I think that will really, and that's what the refs should look for, will really cut down on the injuries, but keep the physicality.
Sammy, I'm thinking of Hillier and a small.
Sarah Fillier?
Yeah, Sarah Fillier.
Yeah.
And the contact side, I think of the small NHL players that can't survive in the playoffs. Because
I think about the draft that just happened. So Sarah Fillier went first and Danielle Serdachny went second.
Yeah.
If you guys remember Danielle Serdachny, she's a 6-foot player. She scored the overtime winner for Canada to win it at the World Championships because she stood in front of the net almost. I don't know if you guys know water polo at all, but you have a whole man that stands in front and you kind of dump it into them and then they kind of circle. They have their back to the goalie, and it seemed like reminiscent of that. And she just held off the defender because she could use her body. So, yeah, I mean, which one of those two is going to be successful next year? More successful. I mean, both will be successful. Both are amazing players, but which one will be more successful? And will it change the World Championship way of reffing as well? Because in the league, they use AHL referees, but in IIHF, they use women referees. So, will that change what the players get to see at the IIHF level versus PWHL level?
I want to ask you a goalie